Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today I have a very special guest on, Dr. Mike Molloy. He's the founder of M2 Nutrition. He helps maximize health, longevity, and human performance, and he's worked with more than 40 CrossFit Games athletes, Olympians, and NFL football play. Mike, really appreciate you coming on and chatting today. Really looking forward to talking to you about anything from carbohydrates to human performance. So looking forward to chatting. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on.
Just anytime I bring a new guest on, I always just like to chat about your background and everything. I know you have PhD, and I think it's actually in something a little bit different compared to like human performance and stuff like that. So just a little curious to hear how you came across that and what it's in and everything like that.
Yeah, I have a PhD in molecular and cellular biology with an emphasis in immunology and microbiology. And yeah, make a long story short, I was working at a muscle lab down at Harvard in Boston, but I always knew I wanted to get my PhD and decided to get back into the educational world, and I ended up going to Dartmouth Medical School up in middle of nowhere, New Hampshire. And right before I got accepted into grad school there, I basically had found my way into the crazy world of CrossFit, like around maybe 2008 or so, 2007. And yeah, 2007-ish. And both of those things kind of started into my life around the same time. And the sport was really just in a very like early stages. And so I grew with it. Competed in the sport in 2008, 2009, and 2010. And along the way, I was like looking for ways to improve my performance. CrossFit back then was very much about something called the zone diet, which is basically like a 30-30-40 split, rough tracking in their own weird way. And I found for me that it wasn't really working. Using the educational skills that I was developing to get my PhD, I started to just apply them like from a research perspective, like going out and digging into research and literature from a human performance perspective. And of course, there were exactly zero studies on CrossFit at that time, but there were a ton of research articles on everything from sprint-based efforts, really high intensity wind gate tests, longer aerobic efforts. And it became pretty apparent pretty quickly that when you train with volume, when you train with intensity, the glycolytic pathway, the use of glucose as a fuel source is the dominant source for energy production, especially as you go deeper and deeper into time domains. And at the time, I was probably eating not nearly enough carbohydrates, tons of dietary fat. And so I just started to flip that on its head. Saw immediate performance benefits, started beating people in workouts that I probably had no business beating. And that was fun. The honest truth was, I knew that at that point, I was probably never going to be a CrossFit Games athlete. By 2010, 2011, things had really started to take off. And so I thought maybe I could help others get there, and started on the coaching journey, and really through entirely word of mouth, started working with a handful of athletes, not necessarily just because of me, but because of their hard work combined with good nutrition, they made success. And before you know it, we had a company with professional athletes, CrossFitters, nowadays High Rocks athletes, Olympians, all over the place. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. So like you said, you said the zone diet. I remember my intro into that was also like paleo too, right? That was like
Yeah.
a big thing as well too with the kind of the CrossFit community
It
as
was,
well.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, that was like Zone was like the official thing, but then this guy named Rob Wolf, who was a big
Mm.
Zone advocate, had a big presence in the community, was talking a lot about paleo. So that kind of became a phase or for a while. And I think there's still a big presence in like paleo-based principles, even though the community may not talk about it as much. They're intrinsic in that community still, but I think people have started to move away from the pure paleo approach and started to integrate a little bit more of a, I'll say, somewhat balanced nutritional aspect, depending upon which person you're talking to, of course.
Yeah. What do you think was do you think that served any purpose at any point in time to with that kind of like diet pattern and stuff like
Yeah, I
that?
think there's a lot of really strong pros as it relates to the paleo diet. I think the average person that walks into a CrossFit gym, maybe they're 3, 4, 5 days a week for upwards of an hour. But like that hour is not necessarily spent with constant movement, right? There's a warm up, there's coaching, there's skill development, and then there's some aspect of higher intensity training. But overall, I would say it actually isn't a tremendously large amount of calories that are being burned in a single class for the average person or the average workout. And a diet that focuses on minimally processed foods, which we know works really well with our brain and its physiology, such that we can understand when we are in fact full and don't blow past our satiety signals, the micronutrient profiles, the removal of processed foods that tends to lead to overeating, which drives all of the chronic diseases that we deal with as a society. I think a lot of that is really a benefit for the average person, never mind somebody stepping into a CrossFit gym. Where I think it goes a little bit sideways is in two different aspects. One is a near religious zealotry around the removal of certain foods. I have at certain stages of my own life, but certainly with clients as well, thought that if I was exposed to gluten, despite not being a celiac, that I might explode in a puff of bread. And that's not great. That's not a good mindset to go through life with. That's deleterious. And on the other aspect is there are individuals that do train with more volume, with more intensity, that are in it for more of the performance-based aspects and competing. And as they move in that direction, the amount of carbohydrates that it's really possible to consume with the paleo diet becomes difficult to support the performance overall. And there's a decent sized population within CrossFit that kind of chases that aspect of it. And so I do think that they are underserved by a very strict paleo diet. There's only so many freaking apples and pieces of broccoli that you can eat in a day. And like at the strictest form of paleo, they're not really fans of even things like potatoes and stuff. And that makes it difficult for a performance athlete to thrive, I think.
Yeah. So like you said, the principles for most people are really good. And then obviously it can become problematic when
Exactly.
if someone is, again, not getting enough carbohydrates or they have a high training volume, that's where it can become problematic there.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's really what it is. I feel like with any sort of like dietary pattern, right? It's like there's probably good principles, but then at some point like you said, if that's all you focus on and it becomes like a religion to you, that's where it can potentially become problematic.
Yeah. I think that in general, one of my major philosophies is nutrition is like there's great sort of themes that we can think of that are applicable to almost everybody, but we all come from unique situations. We have unique stressors. We have a unique nutritional history. What is your relationship with food like? How much do you train? What's your sleep patterns like? How much stress do you have? And those things impact like the more subtle aspects of a diet, right? Like taking somebody who has disordered eating past, maybe bulimia, anorexia, and telling them to follow a really strict paleo diet may not work, maybe great for them physically on some level, but mentally or emotionally, it may trigger some really deleterious things that we would want to avoid versus somebody that's never thought about nutrition in their entire life. Yeah, it's a great way to work them towards it. Let's just get you to eat a less processed diet. And so, from my perspective, nutrition is unique in every single way, much like a thumbprint. And we can apply basic principles, but we have to be more nuanced once you get to a nutritional coaching level.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Like I definitely feel when it comes to any sort of nutrition advice or again what's going to work for someone, like you said, there's so many things that go into it, and then also like you said, their history, that's going to impact it, like where they're at from a physiological standpoint. And then like you said too, are you trying to do more body comp, or are you trying to do more performance related things? And those people try to lump those together, but they are going to be those kind of diverging paths at some point there.
Completely agree. Yeah, I completely agree, Jeff.
So for you, obviously work with high level athletes. Do you still coach yourself, or do you more so coach like other coaches?
No, I coach myself all the time. Yeah. So I love coaching. That's the thing I like to do. Running a business is fun. But at the end of the day, the thing that really lights my fire is working with individuals, whether a lot of them are performance based at this point, but every day, other day people as well, people that are trying to get healthier, improving their relationship with food or to get leaner or all those aspects. That's really exciting for me too. But yeah, I work with a lot of athletes within the sport of CrossFit, mixed martial arts, had a couple of people that competed in the Olympics in the last cycle, a couple of professional athletes here and there. And it's all fun. It's all, as long as somebody is a good person and is open to the dialogue and the coaching process, then I'm going to enjoy working with them for sure.
So when, say you have kind of a high level athlete come to you and stuff like that, is it mostly just performance that they're focused on most of the time, or is there other aspects that you typically work on with them as well too?
That's a great question. And I think it depends to an extent on like where a person's coming from and the background, much like we were just talking about, right? So some people come in and they really are like a blank slate of performance. They are there to maximize every single little aspect of it, no matter what it takes, no matter what they have to give up, no matter what they have to sacrifice. There are athletes that may come in with that sort of mindset, but quickly realize that they also have some demons from their past as it relates to, say, body composition. Within the sport of CrossFit, I think it's great from the perspective of empowering women to find strength or find beauty in strength and muscle development. But there's also an aspect of it where from social media, branding, all of the shit that you wish athletes didn't have to deal with, but they do, that they get caught up in, right? And so in that relationship, there is sometimes a balance that you have to work with an athlete to say, they may be like, hey, I'm here for performance. And then whether it's a stressful time in their life or there's hormones at play that are making them feel a certain way, where they say, hey, I'm not feeling as lean as I used to. Like, I want to back off. And it's great. Like, I understand that. But let's walk through the consequences of if we cut 200 calories of carbohydrates out of your diet, which is where you started before we started working together, how did you feel? How did you perform? How was your recovery? What did your sleep look like back then? Is that really what you want to go back to? Or are you just in that spot right now where you need some reassuring that this is the right path forward of eating more food, perhaps maintaining a couple of percentage of body fat higher, but also recovering better, sleeping better, getting stronger, ultimately being a fitter version of yourself, even if it may not look perhaps as aesthetically pleasing as it might have 6 months ago at drastically less food. So there's a balance with it. A lot of athletes, and that's not just female. Like there are men that I've worked with, extremely high level podium finishers at the CrossFit Games. It's that I think the same thing sometimes. I thought I was here for pure performance, but I think I need to balance this a little bit out because I just feel a certain way right now. I feel a certain aspect about my aesthetics is less optimal than I thought it would be, and apparently I care more about that than I thought I did.
How do you find that blend for them there? Is like, what does that kind of look like?
It's a great question. A lot of athletes, I say the most important aspect is what are the most important parts of your season where we're really trying to optimize that performance, right? So whether it's previously the CrossFit Games or now there's the World Fitness Project aspects, like where do we really want to just truly maximize our performance as much as we possibly can? And how can we work with that such that I'm okay with you maybe eating a little bit less to maintain a leaner aesthetic for half of the year. But as we get into 12 weeks out from a major competition that's going to potentially earn you tens of thousands, if not almost $100,000, like maybe now is the time to really dial in the nutritional aspect, eat a little bit more food such that you can go into that competition performing as optimally as you possibly can. I think there's a concept in the sport of fitness where like leaner or lighter is fitter. And there's a trade-off point that I think most people don't realize. It's okay, yes, you may be 2% lower body fat. And you're like, oh, it's going to help me on gymnastics. But if your muscle protein synthesis is down, your tendons and ligaments are not repairing themselves as much. So you have a more increased rate of injury. If your immune system is a little bit compromised because your body's producing more cortisol and you're getting a little bit of immunosuppression, therefore you're getting sicker. All of these things can impact your actual fitness level, right? And so energy availability, which is like a thing that we measure within the nutritional science, right? It's basically caloric input relative to exercise output. If that number gets too low, we know that it will impact performance in a negative way. And I think the hard part for athletes is everyone's number is a little bit different, right? So you can have these people that are extraordinarily fit that run extremely lean due to genetics, stress in their life, everything else, something like Tia Claire Toomey and Emma Lawson. On the men's side, who's a great example? Noah Olson, someone like that, right? That are extraordinarily fit and also have an extremely lean physique at the exact same time. And that's them. But everyone's situation is a little bit different, right? And comparing yourself to what somebody else's optimal is a really dangerous game. So we got to work with it from a physical perspective, a mental perspective, and an emotional perspective at the end of the day.
Do you think, kind of like you said there, what it sounds like is obviously everyone's going to have that level of body fat and whatnot, where they can start to maybe they lose performance or their performance is fine. Would you say that generally comes down to genetics, or do you think there's, again, lifestyle things that you can do, big picture too, right? Like even training load, I'm assuming probably goes into that and everything like that.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, I think there's a genetic component to it at 100% for sure. What the exact contributing factor is, hard to say, but it probably feels somewhere between 30 to 50% based upon my experience. The other major aspects are things that I think people can control, right? So how much time do you dedicate to your recovery, specifically sleep, right? Like you need to be getting 8 hours of sleep if you're trying to be the best athlete that you can possibly be, which means realistically 9+ hours in bed. And that, as a master's athlete that has kids and family and another job, is probably not viable. But for people that are trying to truly push human performance, like an Olympic athlete or some of the professional CrossFit or High Rocks athletes that are out there, it is something that they should be chasing. The other aspects of it, like stress management, for sure, like how much can you balance the other aspects of your life that are creating stress on your body, such that it's as little as possible so that the physical stress is really all that your adrenal system and your brain are dealing with. And then I think the other aspect, like you said, is having smart coaching, a person that comes in and understands that not every single day needs to be like a bear fight of a workout, that has smart periodization where a lot of the year is built around lower intensity, aerobic, mitochondrial building styles of training, and then a ramp in intensity and sport specific work that allows you to go out and perform at a competition without being completely fried. And I think there are people within both CrossFit, High Rocks, MMA that do a really good job of that. And there are people that do a terrible job at it. And to some extent, we're still learning as a community. We could definitely build off like 20, 30+ years of science that exist on performance overall, but what that looks like in a mixed modal sport and how to really optimize it is something that I think is still being developed and probably changes every year because the demands that are being placed on athletes are changing as well. Like what we used to ask gymnastics of a CrossFit athlete 10 years ago looks very different than what they're asked to do now.
Yeah. So also keeping up with the changing of the sport
Yeah,
as well too, and what that looks like
totally.
as well too. Some things that I think you hit on it a little bit earlier, but what are some things that you're looking at of, hey, this person is we need to gain a little bit of body fat, or maybe we need to not at the right spot. What are some things that you're looking at there with that?
But there's a lot of questions that I ask my athletes once or twice a week. A lot of it comes down to what does your recovery feel like? How are you bouncing back from workout to workout? What percentage of your training sessions feel like garbage? What percent feel absolutely amazing? What percent feel right in the middle? And I would say, like, for somebody that's really training at a high level, we're looking for that to be like an almost a third distribution. If they're not having enough workouts that feel really crappy, they could probably push harder. If all of their workouts feel like shit, they're probably pushing too hard and not recovering enough. So that's one aspect of it. Another big one is sleep quality, right? So there's some good scientific studies out there that basically shown the quality of your sleep has a very prognostic ability to assess like what your recovery looks like. In the off season, most of my athletes will sleep through the night or maybe wake up one time a night to go to the bathroom and then boom, immediately fall back asleep. As training volume ramps up, and if let's say they're not doing a great job with their nutrition, they may wake up two, three times a night with full bladders, have to go pee. Sometimes they fall back asleep, sometimes they don't. As intensity continues to get higher, or if athletes are doing even worse job with their nutrition, hopefully not while working with me, but just in general, then all of a sudden they're like, man, I can't sleep really well at all. I'm constantly awake. I'm up for 2 hours in the middle of the night. I finally fall asleep, then my alarm goes off when I gotta get up and train. So those are signs from my perspective that their body is not necessarily dealing really well with the stress response. Either they got too much cortisol during the daytime, they're retaining water, and then it finally flushes out when they're sleeping, so they're peeing all night long, or the system is flipped on its head in such that their cortisol elevation time is while they're sleeping and it's lower during the first part of the day. At some point, they can also have like a lifestyle-induced low cortisol, which is I think is relatively rare. But there are definitely times that I've seen it, and they're not patients that have full-blown medical drivers of low cortisol production. And so all of those things are possible. And so you assess sleep as well as a major aspect of it. So those are probably the two is like workout recovery, mood, and then sleep aspects.
Do you do anything like HRV or resting heart rate or anything like that as metrics too? Or
Yeah. So not with every athlete. Some of that stuff can really get an athlete's head.
yeah,
Sometimes it's, oh my God, my whoop or whatever says that I can't perform today. I can't perform today. And it's like, gee, God, no, that's not, this thing doesn't dictate your life. But if it's down consistently for a good bit of time, it's definitely something that we want to pay attention to. I tell athletes like you should wear it, but we should only check like the scores on it really once a week if at all possible. And let's look at overall trends. And the female athletes as well, I know this is like mildly a controversial topic depending upon who you talk to, but like HRV is going to vary depending upon their menstrual cycle as well, pretty dramatically. And I think a smart coach can work with that. Some people will say hormones don't have any impact on performance. I've read those studies. I understand what they're saying. I feel like the demographics are just not being hit, or maybe the studies are not being appropriately designed in some form or another to really capture it because man, there's just a lot of women that like we've got scores on their performance or like their rate of perceived exertion doing similar tasks. And like you can see very clear cycle dependencies, even in athletes that don't necessarily pay close attention to their cycle. So that's another driver as well. We're going to look at that. So yeah, to answer your question, I do use them. I don't get too caught up on them, but I do pay attention to them if we have the data.
yeah, no, I agree. I think that it can be useful, but like you said, it can also vary on, like you said, women and their what where they're at in their cycle. And then some people, again, I feel like HRV and resting heart rate can also just vary based on other aspects. And like you said, it ultimately comes down to how that person's feeling as well too, and
Oh,
paying attention to
completely.
that versus just ignoring that. Because I do feel like people tend to go, if they like data, they just go off of that and then they forget how they
Yes.
feel, and that's obviously super important there. You did bring up a good topic too around the menstrual cycle and like training. So you said you have found that you feel like during certain phases of the menstrual
Yeah.
cycle, and I'm assuming you're probably talking like luteal phase, stuff like that, you'll
Yes.
tend to see women's kind of performance go down, is what you've seen working with your athletes and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I would definitely say like late luteal phase and like the week leading into a women's period, like everything gets harder, right? So progesterone levels are going to increase. That increases core body temperature. That increases caloric resting metabolic rate output. So often will increase women's calories by anywhere from 100 to 300, depending upon the size of the athlete during that last week. But that doesn't solve all the problems. So it can make it just feel as though it's a lot harder to achieve the same level of intensity for like anaerobic pieces. Aerobic work, like long, steady state type stuff, seems to be less affected, but it's not impervious either. The other place that I see it quite a bit, not in every athlete, but enough that it's worth mentioning, is literally right during ovulation, right? So the first phase we call the follicular phase. It's basically if day zero is the day one of menses, approximately around day 14, a woman will ovulate. And during that phase, I have seen maybe like 25 to 30% of my athletes, they're like, man, I just feel like shit for 2 days. And then boom, they're totally fine. Usually there's also an accompanying weight spike. It's all water weight. Of course, it's not body fat levels, but just for your viewers so they understand. And then they're out of that, right? Ironically, the women that have the most issues during ovulation don't necessarily deal with that late luteal phase. And the late luteal phase, ones that struggle there, don't seem to have as many issues from the ovulation phase. And then there's women that like really struggled when they actually have their period, right? Because they're dealing with cramping and a lot of inflammation during that period as well. And it's something that I think programmers, their coaches should work with. From a nutritional perspective, we'll push a little extra omega-3 if the athlete is open to it, and not all of them are, like really low doses of aspirin. So not Advil, not Tylenol, but like low dose aspirin hits the COX pathway, which is a sort of the driver of a lot of the inflammatory substrates during that phase of a woman's cycle. And so that's something that like some athletes are willing to play with as well. And so, yeah, we try to manage as best as we possibly can.
Yeah, like you said, it sounds counterintuitive, but it's like like you said, the resting metabolic rate will tend to increase a little bit,
Totally.
which makes sense. I think a lot of women's biofeedback during that time is they're hungrier. I'm sure.
Yeah.
So, like you said, that's something that you do there by increasing their caloric intake a little bit.
Yeah.
Would you say, again, taking this avatar of the population that you work with, is that again usually going to be like an increase? I think you maybe said in like carbohydrates and stuff like that
Yeah, for
typically, or does
sure.
it just depend on the individual?
Great question. So it's sometimes, first off, it's hard sometimes because women often retain water during that phase, and so they're like feeling a little bit fluffier, and so the idea of eating more food can be a difficult thing. So like you gotta like work with the athlete and help them understand that no, you haven't gotten fat. It's just water retention. It's going to be okay. And in fact, having more food will help. So I think this is a situation where I think both fat and carbohydrates have a little bit of a game to play. So one aspect is the athletes are still training with higher intensity, higher VO2 max. And so the metabolic pathways that are going to be used are going to be mostly glucose-based biology. That said, women can be a little bit less like insulin resistant during that phase due to the increase in inflammation. And having a little bit of dietary fat increase as well can also be beneficial. I think in general, just getting the calories up is a good idea though. So let's say we're going to increase a woman's intake by 200 calories. If she wants a specific breakdown of that, which I don't always give, I might just say, hey, just eat 200 more calories. But if they want it, I'll probably increase about 100 calories in fat and about 100 calories in carbs. I'll tell them to keep those carbs more so centered around the workout if they possibly can, not to stress about it too much. So that's the recommendation that we start with, and then we diversify what actually ends up working based upon results.
If somebody does have a competition, CrossFit
Yeah.
competition, is that just hey, this is kind of luck of the draw type situation,
Yeah.
or is there anything like specific that you'll
Try to practice trying to minimize the effects as much as we possibly can. Like I said, the omega-3s to battle inflammation, the low dose aspirin to battle inflammation. We'll also push electrolytes, magnesium citrate, and a couple of other ones to just try to like help optimize some things that are like a little bit more dysregulated during that phase. None of it is a surefire sort of solution. What I found, not universally true, but that like during a high enough level competition, the adrenaline response seems to
yeah.
override all of the negative impacts of the cycle, right? And so while they feel like shit during training and they may not feel necessarily great going into the actual event, which can be psychologically difficult as athletes get more and more advanced in their careers and start to learn how to balance that, like the actual physical effect during a competition tends to be reduced by the adrenaline response of the actual competition itself. Now, that's not to say that there are exceptions to that. Like everyone's seen professional athletes, tennis, et cetera, go on and be like, yeah, that time of the month, I just didn't have it today. And it's okay, great. That's their situation. But for a sport such as CrossFit or High Rocks, where there's maybe a handful of these events all year long and like the gear up is so strong from the crowd and the atmosphere, it seems to blow through most of those issues. Not always, but a lot of the times.
From like a lifestyle perspective, can you push recovery side of things a little bit more as well too to kind of help offset that? Okay, obviously we always want to focus
Yeah.
on sleep, but can you maybe dial that in even more too and focus
Oh,
on that?
we can try. Yeah. So a lot of the things that we do there we will work on like body temp regulation, right? So Progesterone again increases core body temperature. That makes it more difficult to sleep. So
Mm.
if we can cool the bedroom down, or if an athlete's got access to one of the cooling mattresses or pods or anything like that's a good thing. We can do cold showers to try to like help with a little bit of that aspect and SNS regulation, sympathetic nervous system for the listeners. So there's some things that we can do from a meditation perspective and that those things. How much those really impact is hard to say, but at the end of the day, even if it's placebo effect, like who cares, right? If it's working. And so we do try though. That's a really great question, Jeff, around what else athletes can do. What works the best? Man, I would probably say like cooling down the bedroom. And then even if it's just the end of the day, like a 5 minute box breathing or 10-minute calm session on an app or something like that, just to get the athlete to turn off the sympathetic nervous system a little bit, that really helps a lot.
Yeah, no, I love that. And like you said too, the adrenaline also helps a ton too to just push through that. And I think again, I think when women do hear this, like it can get in their head, and sometimes it is okay. You still need to just go and do things.
Totally.
It goes back to the HRV thing that you discussed too, right? Sometimes you see these numbers and it can get
Yeah.
in your head more than anything, and
Yeah,
that
during
is too bad.
competition, I strongly advise athletes to take those things off entirely. We can't do anything about the score. What value does it really provide if you wake up and see a score of red or green on your watch? And most of the time, it's going to be red during a competition. And so let's just get that out of the picture and not even wear it during, if it's a 3-day competition, take it off for the 3 days.
And I don't know about you, there's been days where maybe my watch says I'm under recovered, but then they'll sometimes end up being your best training
Yeah,
sessions and
crush
stuff
it,
like that
right? Go
too.
on PR. No, no joke. It absolutely happens for sure.
This is more of a broader question around, okay, if somebody you're feeling like they are slightly under recovered or they're under recovered, do you do anything? And again, it may just be all the things we just discussed, but I'm talking more so just, again, not necessarily in the menstrual cycle, but if somebody is under recovered from a nutrition perspective, are there any things that you typically try to work on there with anyone in terms of helping with recovery, or I don't know if it
Yeah, so
changes?
if somebody is under, if they're giving like signs of under recovery, there's like a checklist that I'll go through my head. Like first is almost always sleep, right? Just to knock out the obvious thing, right? If somebody's sleeping 6 hours a night, like boom, we found the answer. The other ones that like are related but not necessarily directly nutritional that I think are just questions to make sure people are doing a good job with would be hydration. Like a lot of times people are going to perform poorly and see really bad HRV scores if they're not bringing enough fluids into their body. And that's just regular old hydration, right? Like it doesn't have to be anything fancy with electrolytes or anything. Just drink more water or fluids overall. That's an easy one. Three is just checking to make sure that there's been no dramatic changes in stress in their life as well, right? So going through a breakup or mom or dad is sick or something like that. If those things are going on, I want to know about them as a nutrition coach, not because I'm going to solve them, but because it's one, good to let them talk about it, and two, it's going to impact their recovery as well. Three, let's just confirm training hasn't changed dramatically. Sometimes athletes will fail to mention, oh, yeah, we're doing a big anaerobic block right now or something like that, right? If all of those things are unchanged, though, then yeah, it's time to take a look at the nutritional aspects. So obviously, caloric intake is a big one. I would love for all my athletes to weigh and measure all of their food all of the time. I think there's a natural sort of movement away at some point a year after of weighing and measuring your food. Like, yeah, I know what whatever 250 grams of cooked white rice looks like. Like actually you don't. Like your brain sucks at it in reality. And so they may not actually understand how much food they're putting on their plate, even though they are measuring it. So that's one aspect.
Real quick, sorry, when you
Yeah.
say caloric intake, are you just saying making sure they're eating enough, or kind
Like
of more maintenance?
exactly. So let's make sure that if they've been reporting 2,500 calories, that it's still the same 2,500 calories that they were reporting 6 months ago or 3 months ago, and that they're not like eyeballing 50% of their food all of a sudden. That's also on the lifestyle side of clients when they're like, oh, I'm not losing weight anymore. And I'm like, have you been weighing and measuring your food? And they're like, actually, and I'm like, there we go. And then the other aspect of it is just making sure that like sometimes people get really caught up in macros, but micronutrients are also super critical. Magnesium, zinc, B vitamins, all of those things are excreted in some way or another by high intensity training, right? So magnesium, potassium, to some extent, zinc are going to be lost through sweat and urine as well for potassium. B vitamins are like really critical for glucose to ATP conversion, and some of those are lost through that process. And so if a person's not eating enough red meat or something like that, it can be something that we don't necessarily catch by like just looking at the food journal. But over time, symptomatically, we can go back and be like, oh, you know what? Shit, like you actually haven't been eating a lot of XYZ rich foods. Let's make sure that those are getting in there. So those are things that you can pay attention to as well. And then I'll just bring it up. Again, my job as a nutrition coach is not to solve medical issues, but if all of that stuff is dialed in and a person still feels like shit, like sometimes it's worth actually asking them to go get some blood work done with a PCP or one of the online services. I can't tell you the number of times that women have been like, and men as well, have been like, you know what, I'm just kind of like dragging ass. And like, man, they're doing everything right. And then we go and get like their TSH and T4 looked at, and sure enough, it's subclinical hypothyroidism. Like it's not above 5 or something like that's going to trigger a doctor to be like, oh, you have hypothyroid, but maybe it's 3.5 or 4. And from my perspective, that's still elevated compared to where we want it to be due to whatever reason. And so in that situation, then we can dig into a whole new line of work. And again, I'm not a doctor to make recommendations, but I can at least point people in the right direction to have those conversations so we can get to the answers that we want to.
Yeah. Do you find that is it more of a kind of a stress thing there, or is it like a lack of
Good
like
question.
all that?
So some of it can definitely can be like lifestyle induced hypothyroidism for sure. Some of it can be like nutritional, right? So if some, like ironically, like especially in the sort of that health biohacking community where they're eating just shitloads of green vegetables, like those are loaded with these things called goitrogens. Really a lot of good stuff in them, but these actually have the ability to inhibit the function of a lot of the thyroid like downstream biology, like signaling steps. And so ironically, if you like take those out of the diet or even just cook them as opposed to having them raw, boom, all of a sudden that'll come back into a normal situation. And then just realistically, you got to remember that autoimmune diseases like Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is basically a situation where the immune system attacks a part of the thyroid, they are 4 to 5 times more common in women than in men. And so you can see signs of that. It would be something called a TGB or a TPO test on a blood work that would indicate that like if those are above like background or above normal distribution, that like, yeah, you have an autoimmune disease. It's actually ironically relatively easy to manage, but it would be something that would be easy to miss as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you working with CrossFit athletes and athletes in general? Do you do any sort of like nutrition periodization with them, or is it strictly? I'm sure maybe it depends on what they need to work on, but is there any sort of kind of periodization with the nutrition side of things with any of you the athletes and stuff like that?
There's a couple of ways that I think about periodization. It may not be exactly the way that you're thinking about it. So one is like how rigid we are with like our tracking and our nutrition overall. So things are changing a little bit in the sport because of there's a new thing called the World Fitness League where they're competing like almost all year long now. But even there, there's still an off season. And during that phase, I like to actually have them put that food scale away, listen to their hunger cues a little bit more. They still eat really high quality foods, but we don't really strictly track the macros because I think it's good to have a mental break. At the end of the day, I don't want them to be insanely fit athletes, but have a horrible relationship with food where if their food scale were to break, they have no idea how to put a meal together for the day, right? That's not okay. So that's one aspect of periodization that we do. And then as we get back into the season, boom, more tracking comes back into their life. The second aspect would be just like a rotational aspect to like the foods that we want them to eat that are micronutrient dense. So I don't get like ultra dogmatic about it. If everybody is, or if an athlete is only eating apples, oranges, and like spinach, and that they're like, oh, cool, I'm covering my micronutrients. Like maybe in the fall, let's rotate into some sweet potatoes, some squashes, sure, apples. As like summer is coming around, let's them get some berries going on, maybe some other greens that are out there. Let's rotate those a little bit just to get some diversity in the micronutrients that we're bringing into our body to make sure that we're covering all of our bases. And that's I'll only say that that's an important level of detail once everybody has covered the basic needs. So if their sleep is dialed in, if they're hydrating, if they're eating an appropriate amount of food with a good macronutrient breakdown for protein, fat, and carbs, then we worry about that level of detail. If they're not doing those three things or four things, we don't even touch that topic yet. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I didn't know if I like how you phrase it. Like sometimes there are maybe phases where you also like change up the types of foods and stuff, and that can be a form of periodization. Like you said, it is a kind of broad definition of periodization. What exactly are you
Yeah.
discussing? And then it's also, hey, is it body comp? Is it performance?
Right.
That can also change everything in terms
That's
of
a great
periodization.
point as well, for sure. Yeah, there's some core principles that we maintain all year long, right? So like protein is going to always be somewhere in the range of 1.8 to 2.2 grams per pound of body weight, or excuse me, grams per kilogram of body weight. We're always going to want to have some micronutrient dense options in our diet. We're going to make sure that we're going to have decent fats in there, right? Because they're important for sex hormone production. So all of those things are going to be things that we care about all year round. And it's just like some details that change as it relates to like their importance throughout the seasons. But I know some people think about, oh, should I decrease my protein? And I'm like, no, like realistically, your body doesn't is not that sensitive. Like it's the level of hacking that's probably not like actually supported by biological data.
What would you say, since you do work with athletes, but then also Gen Pop, and I'm assuming we could maybe lump like body composition, body transformation
Sure.
people in that, like what would you say are the biggest differences in terms of nutrition for someone that's an athlete compared to Gen Pop body comp type?
Yeah, for sure. The big thing is probably just the volume of carbohydrates, right? So some of my professional female athletes that are training, we'll say upwards of 4 hours a day, they're eating 400, 450 on the high side as we come into a competition, 500 grams of carbs, depending on how large of an athlete they are, 3,000 to 3,500 total calories per day. A person that's more aesthetic or general population training five, we'll say even somebody that's really serious about it 5 days a week for an hour a day, they're probably close to 50%, 65% of that number. Like we're probably looking for, let's say, a 150-pound female that trains 5 days a week. If she's got a below average step count, we're still looking at 2,000 calories for maintenance. That's 67% of some of my high level athletes. And so just as a really like, if you think about the breakdown of it, like the protein intake is going to be essentially roughly the same, maybe a little bit lower, but not dramatically. The dietary fat floor, we still need to have approximately at least 25% of our calories coming from dietary fat to maintain sex hormones and all the good things that we want around healthy cholesterol and all that good. So the real variable that's going to change is really like carbohydrate intake. The second aspect is quality, right? Like I said before, if I have a female that's eating 450 grams of carbs, like she's going to need some processed carbohydrates in her diet to get that food into her body in a way that is not also stressful. If she were to try to do that with sweet potatoes, even, right? Like it's going to take a lot of energy to digest. She's going to feel full a lot of the day. It's going to be a relatively miserable experience. But if we can use some processed carbs, it's way easier. For an athlete that is training a much lower volume, they don't need those things, right? And in fact, like from a perspective of maintaining nutritional control and compliance and things like that, we want to have their diet be as unprocessed as possible, such that satiety signals are really robust. They actually feel full and satisfied at the end of a meal. There's a lot of volume to it because it's going to drive actual chances of success so much higher. And so those are like probably some of the dramatic differences between those two demographics. The other major aspect is like for most performance-based athletes, I'm trying to get them to eat more. I'm looking for strategies to get more into their body for the most part. Aesthetic-based clients, it's not about always driving lower, but for the people that struggle to lose weight, they are usually unaware of hidden caloric intake, and figuring out where those sources are and then modifying those behaviors is by far and away the hardest part, right? Somebody that's never paid attention to their nutrition before, and we make changes, like boom, they'll make progress really quick. It's the person that's, man, I can't lose weight. I'm doing everything right. And then you look at their diet and it's like on first pass, you're like, oh yeah, but then you're like, oh, you're not weighing and measuring your food. Oh, you're going out to eat 5 days a week. Oh, like you're doing takeout every day at work. Oh, there's probably an extra 20% of calories hidden in each of those meals. And this is why you're following the plan, but not making progress. And so the differences, like the struggles that we get from between those two populations, also tend to just be dramatically different.
Yeah, like you said, the performance-based person, for them, you're really trying to push more food. And then someone that's more body comp, like you said, it's finding those hidden calories that they have and add into their day and figuring out where those sources are coming from and trying to decrease those. Something interesting you did hit on though, too, was like at a certain point, a lot of people, I could, and correct me if I'm wrong, you work with the athletes here, but like I could see where you're trying to increase food intake, and the problem becomes maybe that person is very health focused, so then they tend to eat more nutrient dense, low calorie density type foods. And like you said there, for some of those athletes, you want to try and push that the opposite and try and get more of those easier to digest type foods in and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah, absolutely, for sure. It's so during like major training sessions, especially when it gets hot somewhere and it's difficult to eat, like we're using a lot of liquid-based carbohydrates, which is something that I would almost never recommend to a lifestyle client, right? Like it's the exact opposite of what we want to be doing. But yeah, we're going to push like processed sugar-based like options into their routine to try to get calories down. We're going to use 2 protein shakes a day to help reduce the amount of digestion like energy that's required, right? And then when we get to a rest day where like they are finally not in flight or fight mode for 4, 5, 6 hours, then we will push nutrient density hard with them, right? Because it's okay, finally, like your body gets a chance to actually spend all day digesting if we need to. So here's a day where, yeah, you go still have rice, go have your oats, have your cereal, but let's also make sure that we crush some fruit, some sweet potatoes. Let's get some vegetables, have a salad, and work all of those things into our rest and our like active recovery days as well, so that we don't end up micronutrient deficient in something that's critical for our performance. So there's a balance to everything, and every situation is a little bit unique, but like those are definitely trends that we follow for sure. For sure.
What are some of the like kind of variations in terms of like calories that you've seen and like carbohydrates you've seen? Again, I know this is going to be dependent on, hey, are we talking athletes? Because I'm sure there's a wide range there. And then you add in the general pop body comp people as well, too. I'm sure it widens that gap even more.
Oh, yeah. So some of the most extreme things that I've seen. So like on the male side, there's these two twins in the sport of CrossFit, Spencer and Saxon Panchik. They're relatively small, like men by comparison to a lot of the people in sport. They would not like being called small. Both of them have 500-pound back squats. Like they absolutely crushed me. Like they were eating upwards of 6,500 calories a day, despite being on the smaller height and weight side in the sport. There's a fun story of a guy who was a CrossFit Games athlete once, but he was also a professional arborist out of Maine. So he like takes down trees for a living for like 8 hours a day, 4 days a week. And so even though he was only training like 90 minutes, like we had to feed that man like 7,000 calories because his day-to-day job was basically like an all-day training session, like moving lumber around. On the female side, I don't know what it is about Canadians, but Emma Lawson, who's like a very high level one, and then Sydney Mikulishin, also 4,000 calorie type input during their training session. And if you go to Europe, we've been like, for whatever reason, like the Norwegian, sort of like Iceland, like Finland region of soccer players up there, they just need so much food. It's crazy. Like that, their training sessions are long for sure, but there's something genetic going on there as well, where their intakes are extremely high. On the gem pop side of things, it's hard. So some people, I think honestly, like the biggest driver for most people in the general population that gets very little attention would be like what we call NEAT, or non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Ironically, something that Mike Nelson talks about a lot. And so people that have relatively low NEAT, that sit in a chair for most of the day or sit behind a car, driving a steering wheel, they have relatively low caloric output and their energy needs are quite low by comparison to where you would think they would be. But you have people, maybe they're a nurse, right? And so they're potentially on their feet for 15,000 steps a day, or a server, right? Somebody like a waiter at a restaurant can rack up 15, 18,000 steps, a physical therapist. And a lot of times those things get missed in what people's caloric needs are. And so they may get a plan from a generalized online macro tracker where there's not a lot of subtlety or interpretation. And it's, oh, you need to eat 1,400 calories a day to lose weight. And they do it for a week, but they're like starving. Next thing you know, they're binge eating on the weekends and they're not making any progress. Someone like me comes along, it's like, whoa, no, like your maintenance, because of how much you move outside of the gym, is probably closer to 2,200 calories a day. Let's aim for 1,700, 1,800 calories for your cut. And all of a sudden, they're like, they may only lose a pound a week, but it's much more sustainable. It's a viable path forward. And all those binge episodes that were really ruining their progress all of a sudden go away. And so that's an example for the general population of a demographic of people that you might not think needs to eat as much food as they actually do to generate a weight loss approach that's actually sustainable long term. And that's, I think, where most people go awry.
Yeah, the neat stuff's super interesting, right? Because, and I think you actually referenced this on the podcast with Dr. Mike, but the Levine study, I think it was from like 99, where they
Yeah.
overfed participants. I think it was like 1,000 calories. And some people just naturally expended a lot more,
Yes.
and then some people less. And so that you saw more fat gain for the same surplus for people. You mentioned, hey, you obviously are going to take the person that's an office worker versus someone, like you said, that's a waitress, and that person's needs going to be way higher. We could potentially offset that by just, hey, let's try and get some more movement like throughout the day, and
Totally.
hit a step goal and stuff like that. Because from my
Yeah.
understanding with the Levine study, it was like that was just the people's natural kind of
It was their
response, right?
natural response. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. I agree. So yeah, getting people to just learn to move more or stand more makes a huge difference in like success realistically. There's like all the health benefits, like lower cardiovascular disease, that probably plateau somewhere around like 7,500, 8,000 steps based upon recent meta-analyses. And that's great. I don't want to like combat that at all. But just getting people to generally find ways to stand and move their body more, that's not dedicated exercise, I think is probably one of the biggest levers that people can pull for weight maintenance and weight loss. All of my best weight loss stories, people that are going to lose upwards of 100 pounds, etc., it comes down to, yes, of course, we're teaching them better nutritional strategies. Yes, we're trying to get them to change their mindset around how they like use food as a coping mechanism. But the biggest one probably is learning to make movement a part of their lifestyle. And if they do, it's like the sky is the limit to how much weight they can possibly lose. If they don't, I find there's almost always some like resistance that we hit at some point that's hard to break through, because there's only so little food that a person naturally wants to eat in our society today. And if a person's at 1,400 calories and we've hit a little bit of a plateau, it's like, I don't want to drop them down to 1,200. That feels like a miserable experience. Never mind, how are they supposed to have a social life and go out in the world? But if we can get them to expend 500 more calories a day, maybe build some muscle mass so that their resting metabolic rate comes up at 100, 150 calories, like now we're in business.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, just getting people to move like that. Like you said, that's a huge lever that you can pull. And like you said, in today's world, I feel like that's definitely a big one that we can pull there. But then we come back to the athletes when you're saying, hey, some of these guys are upwards of 6,000 calories like per day and stuff like that. That probably, again, probably a genetic component to it. But again, that really does come down to like the activity levels that they have. And that's obviously dedicated exercise for them. But again, that's probably where you see some of those higher numbers is just the amount of exercise that they're doing and things like that.
It is. Yeah. Like some of the athletes that are out there, they're still coaching a lot of the times too. So not only are they like working out for 4 or 5 hours a day, but then they're also on their feet for another 2 or 3, bouncing around a gym or something like that. And so all of it adds up and you just got to take all of it into account, depending on, doesn't matter really where you are. Like we just need to encapsulate as much as we possibly can into that picture of who you are and then go from there. We just can't worry about what somebody else is doing, right? A lot of times people will look at athletes like a Tia Claire Toomey, who's like the most dominant athlete in sport, and be like, man, like my macros are higher than hers. Like I would love to have her body composition. Why isn't it lower? And it's like, yeah, but you have to recognize as soon as Tia's done training for the vast majority of her career, maybe not now that she's got kids, but she would literally go plant her ass on a couch and just recover. And it's like, you're training for 2 hours and then you're coaching for 5. You know what I mean? You're on your feet. You've got 20,000 steps every single day outside of your training. Like you are fundamentally different people. We cannot compare you to this one person that you would love to be.
And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. There's probably that mismatch too at some point, right? Where if you have high energy expenditure, you're also trying to get a ton of steps where the body is going to compensate a little bit, right? In terms of it wouldn't be a 1-to-1 of you're getting all the calories burned from 20,000 because at some point the body has to compensate it.
I completely agree. Yeah, exactly. 100%. There's this, I'm sure you're very familiar with it. There's like this idea of a linear versus a constrained energy model, right? And like to simplify it for listeners really quickly, it's imagine if I'm not a runner, but if I were to all of a sudden to go decide to run 10,000 meters today, like a 10K, I would probably plant my ass on the couch for the rest of the day, right? By comparison to if it's a rest day, I will naturally find myself walking around the house doing more things, right? So what I say by constrained is yes, if I dedicate more energy to full on exercise, my brain will subconsciously choose to move less throughout the rest of the day as well. And so it's when I talk to people about like calories in and calories out, at the end of the day, like it's 100% accurate, right? There's no denying it. It's just basic laws of thermodynamics, but it's not arithmetic. It's not addition and subtraction. It's more like advanced calculus, right? With all the variables that you're trying to take into account. And unless you live in a literal metabolic ward where they're like measuring like oxygen CO2 output, it's impossible to really know. You're just trying to estimate it as best as you possibly can.
Is there, because when we think of the high energy flux kind of model, right, where it's, hey, you're expending a lot of energy, but you're also bringing in a lot of energy, right? And again, that kind of goes hand in hand with cable tipping things up. And I think you have a background in like gut health too, right? Like that's okay. What is that limit there? And like, how high can you take that for someone? Because I'm assuming there's probably got to be some sort of limit from an athlete that moves a ton, but you also, hey, maybe we do get them to fuel a lot, but there's got to be that limit at some point.
Yeah. Yeah. There is like I'll say there's a point where it just becomes very uncomfortable, like for people to eat. Like I'll say that the body is pretty remarkable when it comes to what it can digest and absorb in today's world of processed foods, where it's relatively easy for some of these things to be broken down and brought into the body. But that doesn't mean that there's not like a cost to it, right? But here's a good example. So for a lot of athletes that I work with, where getting them to eat more of a processed diet is not something that they naturally want to do, they will often deal with gastrointestinal issues as we increase their food intake if they don't simplify their diet, right? So if they're eating a lot of salads, a lot of potatoes, a lot of fruit, all of a sudden they're struggling with diarrhea-based issues. And that's what's going on is the body's just basically at some point being like, fuck it, I got to give up on digesting this thing. Like flood it with water, boom, get it out, right? Let's just get it out of the system. And so they're not digesting and absorbing all of that nutrient. If we take those athletes and get them to be like, all right, sounds crazy, but let's replace your sweet potato and some of your vegetables with a bowl of white rice or freaking Rice Krispies. I don't care, right? It's still gluten-free. Like you're all good. There's nothing inflammatory going on here. All of a sudden, all those issues go away. You know what I mean? So that's an interesting aspect to it. Of is there a limit? I haven't found it yet, but I've not like you hear stories of Michael Phelps eating like 10,000 calories a day with like full pizzas and stuff like that. Who knows how much of that's really true? But like the people that I've had upwards of 6,000 calories, like generally they're fine unless they try to eat, ironically, too clean of a diet.
Yeah, you got to, again, it kind of what we said earlier, you got to get some sort of processed type food in there. Is there a point where you can take that too far in terms of like too much? Because then again, I'm sure it also comes into some people are going to respond better to maybe more processed foods from a gut perspective. So it's all just you have to figure out.
You can take it too far, right? Like in general, you don't want to just have them eat a completely garbage-based diet, right? There needs to be some balance there. And like I said, a lot of that comes down to rest days or dinner once they finally finished training for the day to make sure that we get a balanced intake. We don't want to like the message to be like, oh, you train 2 hours a day, you just get to eat, fast food and garbage. No, this is a very specific population that we're talking about here. The other aspect I think of nutritional health or nutrition performance that's connected to gut health is like the connection between your sympathetic nervous system. So there's your brain, the central nervous system here, and then we have something called our enteric nervous system that lives in our gut, and this thing that's the vagus nerve that kind of connects these two. And they're highly connected. And so athletes that train with a lot of intensity and a lot of volume naturally have a lot of what we call sympathetic nervous system activation. Your sympathetic nervous system is your fight or flight. And then there's something called your parasympathetic nervous system, which is your rest and digest or your feed and breathe system. And so if you do a lot of work over here that doesn't allow your body to kind of chill out, it has impacts on your digestive tract. Think about it from an evolutionary survival perspective. If things are like a bear fight type situation, right, where you're like fighting for your life, does it really matter if you're going to go eat your next meal? And the answer is no. It's not essential that you eat food even over a day or 2 days to survive, right? And so what it does is it like down regulates your appetite signal pretty dramatically. And so a lot of times athletes will be like, I'm not hungry. And I'm like, yeah, you still have to fucking eat though, right? Because your brain just isn't sending the signal. And then sure enough, they take a full-blown rest day. And like by 11 a.m., they're like, bro, I'm starving. And I'm like, yes, because your brain has finally chilled out. The other half, the parasympathetic system has turned on, and your body's like, holy shit, I'm energy depleted. Like I need fuel like right now. You know what I mean? And so like just teaching athletes is honestly the most important part there to help them understand what's happening in their body so that they don't just listen and be like, oh, I'm not hungry, I don't have to eat. It's no, you 100% still do have to eat, even if you're not like feeling a big hunger response right now. And again, that's a lot of genetics and personality dependent. Some athletes deal with that a lot, others not at all.
It's funny you say that because like I could see that being the case for athletes, but even like the Gen Pop client that's trying to like lose weight too, right? It's like, oh, I'm just not hungry. And then it's like, and you've said this a few times throughout where it's like, now your calories are really low. You get into that relaxed state on the weekend and then it's you're
exploding, right? Yeah. Exploding calories.
It's that's why I try to tell a lot of people, I feel like when it comes to fat loss, a lot of it really is like subconscious, right? You have that drive to move less, but then you also have that drive to consume more calories, and you can make that worse by, like you said, restricting during the week and not eating enough. Totally. And then it just all comes together when you get into that parasympathetic state, like on the weekend or whatever it is.
Or for a lot of general population weight loss people, what happens is like they'll experience a different type of stress response. So it's more of like a immediate sort of like discomfort from whatever. So like a baby crying, or they got into a fight with their significant other. And they've learned over time that due to the cortisol spike of that stress response, that they can make them feel better by spiking their blood sugar, right? Mm-hmm. Keep in mind, when one of the best ways to stop a cortisol spike, and cortisol, just for your listeners in case they don't know, is a stress response hormone, is to spike your blood sugar. That's why post-workout, I want my athletes to consume a pretty good amount of carbohydrates because it's going to stop that cortisol stress response. But doing the same thing for an emotional or a psychological based stress response teaches the body over time that food is the way to manage. And ironically, whether they're hungry or not, they will use that stress response as a trigger to go eat food, and then they're going to like basically completely derail their progress. And so that population, teaching them that stress doesn't mean you reach for the cupboard, but instead you go get your journal, right? You sit down and you like think about your thoughts. You go for a walk and unplug. That is the most important aspect, right? Yeah. So it's like the stress and its impacts on the demographics is potentially going to be dramatically different depending upon who you're talking to.
And people aren't going to want nutrient-dense foods when they're in that state either, right?
No, literally, if it's in the house, you're going to eat it. It's just a physiological response. And potentially for people, it's 20 years of social and mental embedding around this is the action, right? Maybe even something they learned from watching their parents. And so it's a process. Like nutrition coaching is honestly for a general population. Yeah, it's 50% like whatever nutrition coaching and 50% like therapy.
Yeah, no, I feel like stress and just stress load on the body, I feel like it's just super important, especially for Gen Pop. Even I'm sure athletes too, but especially when it comes to just like improving body composition. Another thing too, because we talk about how, okay, like people's like calorie range can range all over the place, right? Like you've seen upwards of 6,000, 7,000, and then as low as, depending on fat loss phase for Gen Pop, can be in the thousands, right? How do you typically go about finding someone's maintenance range? Is that something that you try and establish like fairly quickly with people, or what does that look like?
Yeah, so for the most part, we use a sort of like intake formula. There's a guy named Alan Aragon who's great, right? And he's got his Alan Aragon equation that I think is a really good starting point. We've modified it a little bit based upon like CrossFit demographics, which is probably like 75% of the population that we deal with. But basically, we'll use that equation as a starting point for people that have never tracked before and say, okay, this is where I think we're supposed to be based upon the average aspects. And then we're going to learn over time whether or not we were right or wrong, right? So we watch the scale, we listen to hunger cues, things like that. And then based upon that information, we can, if they're a weight loss client, we can make a 20% reduction in their calories, which is enough to drive weight loss, but not so steep that they're going to be completely miserable throughout that process. You know what I mean? And so if somebody comes in with nutritional history already, though, they've done a good job of tracking, you can go look through their food logs and like, oh yeah, you've actually tracked for the last 3 months. Like the formula is honestly not super useful by comparison to that real world data. You might as well use that real world data to go estimate or get a better picture of what their caloric needs are and then work off of that, assuming they've been doing a good job with their tracking.
That's where I feel like it can get tricky for people, is we know that like we're just not very good at tracking
No.
food. So do you maybe artificially adjust that based on what they've been tracking into their skill, and then again,
Yeah,
just base it off of like their biofeedback and how they're feeling and stuff like that?
a
Or
little bit. Yeah, honestly, a lot of it comes down to just an appropriate intake form from my perspective. It's like you just got to be like honest with, or get people to be honest with you. Basically, hey, listen, like these numbers that you told me, how often did you actually track them? Don't bullshit me because if you do, you're just screwing yourself over.
yeah,
Like this is a judgment-free zone. I don't give a shit what the answer is. I just need to know so I can do my job. And so once you help people understand that, hey, listen, just be straight with me. If they're not real numbers, that's fine. Like it'll help save us time in the long run. Most of the time, people will be transparent with you. But yeah, in general, my assumption is always assume people are eating a little bit more than they say they are and exercising a little bit less than they say they are. So if they're like, oh, 60 to 90 minutes, I'm like, okay, 60 minutes. If they're like, oh, it's roughly 1,800 to 2,000 calories, I'm like, all right, it's probably 2,100. You know what I mean?
yeah.
That's just a general safe assessment.
Yeah. I found I've had to sort, because like when I first started nutrition coaching and really into just like calories and macros, it was like, oh man, don't want to go under a certain amount of calories with
Oh,
people.
I
And
get
it's
it.
like you're afraid to tell other coaches that you're having somebody eat 1,600 calories. But then the
Oh,
more you
yeah.
learn, it's okay. Yeah, I'm telling them to eat 1,600, but they're probably eating like
Oh,
20, that's like 2,200 calories for them.
oh, totally. Like everything in my mind is like relative, right? Every once in a while, you're like, I get this male athlete. He's probably like early 40s, trains 2 hours a day. He's like 210. And based upon his tracking, the bro cannot be like, tells me he's never eating more than like 2,400 calories a day. And I'm on what planet? You know what I mean? There's literally no way. It is not that he's doing anything wrong. It's just like there's something in his tracking that's off that I haven't identified yet. And realistically, we don't need to identify it because as long as he's consistently inaccurate in the same direction every time with all of his tracking, I, as a smart nutrition coach, can just adjust my numbers and know that he's probably at closer to 3,000. You know what I
Yep.
mean? You go from
Yep.
there.
Yeah. And that's where, again, you just base it off their biofeedback, how they're feeling, looking at
Right.
scale weight, like you said, and everything like that determines where you go with that. Mike, we didn't dive into this initially. Just real quick, what does your kind of training and nutrition look like? What do you do for you train still CrossFit style, or what do you?
Yeah, a little bit. Not as much as I used to. Yeah, two kids and a couple of professional careers is not always the time to crush myself in the gym and then be a zombie for the rest of the day. Really quickly, I do a mixture of hypertrophy and strength training a couple days a week, and then I do a couple of longer aerobic-based sessions to keep VO2 max up with a Concept 2 bike that's probably got a couple of million miles on it downstairs, or meters, I should say. And so that's the vast majority of my training. I also spend a lot of time skiing, rock climbing, things like that. Just try to stay outside, and then chasing my little children around. That's also a solid 12,000 steps per day to try to keep up with them. So nutritionally, I would say I probably eat an 80% unprocessed diet. Lots of protein, 190 pounds, probably a roughly 190 to 200 pounds of grams of protein per day. A lot of fruits, potatoes, but I also enjoy a ton of white rice and things like that. I'll do some higher fiber wraps to keep my fiber intake up. But my kids are solidly in a berry phase, and so I am also in a berry phase of life as well. But yeah, those are the key things. It's nothing really fancy or sexy about it. The thing that probably I protect the most is my sleep. Like I'm rock solid about making sure that I'm a bare minimum 7 every single night, and like most of them are closer to 8. That is the thing that like I am unwilling to compromise unless I literally have to travel somewhere. I will cancel social plans. I will leave parties. I will do whatever I have to do to get my 8 hours of sleep every night.
And as a parent, that becomes tougher and tougher to do that. You really do have to protect.
Luckily, mine are 4 and almost 7 now, and so we're on the other side of the true sleep disasters. But yeah, I felt it for a while there. That was a tough couple of years. I was getting sick. There was one winter, I think I was sick for 12 straight weeks with just like resolution of one cold, immediately get another one, like over and over. And I was like, I don't like this, and it was probably due to sleep. So
we have one. He's just under 1.5, and it's, man, I can tell you, like, you have to be you have to protect it as much as you can. And anytime you're not intentional with it, it's like it goes down, and like you can tell a difference, right, in terms of your recovery and your training, and you can definitely tell a difference. It's like low key, but it adds up in everything over time.
It really does. It was a hard thing for me to let go of the performance-based aspects of training. I still chase like some strength numbers here and there, but I'm almost 45 years old. And so realistically, the days of hitting PRs are mostly behind me for the most part. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that it has to be an end to everything. It's just a recalibration of what's important. And for me, a lot of it is based mostly around like injury prevention. Yeah. Like I want to train, I want to push myself as hard as I can while making sure that I'm not going to blow my back out or all of a sudden tweak my freaking scapula or my neck or something like that, such that I can't be a dad the next day. Yep. It's just a different priority this time in life. But yeah, it was fun chasing best 300-pound cleans and 250-pound snatches and all that stuff was fun, but I'm happy to let it go as well.
Yep. Yeah, you have to, like you said, watch that intensity in your training and monitor that a bit more and everything like that when you're not getting enough sleep and you got the kids and
completely.
And so cool, Mike. Really appreciate your time, man. A ton of great information in here. Do you have any places where you want to lead the audience to?
Yeah, I was just saying, check out mtperformancenutrition.com on Instagram or mtperformancenutrition.com, which is our website. You can find me on there as far as a lot of the content that I produced over the last couple of years. My actual Instagram page is filled with nothing but children and dog pictures. So unless you really like those things, it's going to be lost on you. But yeah, no, the IG is probably the best place to check us out.
Cool, man. Love it. I appreciate your time. Thanks for hopping on here today.
Of course.